Hi there, Karyn O'Connor of SingWise.com here. So just the other day, I came to the realization that I have spent the past few months recording and posting videos on this channel and just assuming that you all have read and studied enough about vocal pedagogy and the vocal instrument itself to understand all the terminology that I use in my videos. And I realize now, perhaps a little late in the game, that this assumption was probably not the best one to make. I use medical and scientific terms when explaining how the voice works. For those who are not well read and who don't tend to grasp scientific concepts easily, I realize that this can be confusing and intimidating initially. And I know that there are some teachers who believe that it's absolutely unnecessary to discuss the voice in such a manner. But my opinion is, and will always be, that using the proper terminology when discussing the voice, or anything else for that matter, actually eliminates confusion. It allows us to have a common language, first of all, and it also helps me as a teacher to be more precise in my language when I give directives and instructions to my students. While I do use some analogy and occasionally some imagery, I try to limit the amount of subjective language that I use because singers don't all experience the same sensations when using their voices, and I flat out reject the use of pseudoscience in the voice studio. So in using the correct medical and scientific terms and accurately explaining physiological and acoustical principles as best I can, and hopefully in a way that makes sense for you, I'm convinced that you will actually develop a much better understanding of the voice than if I were to talk to you as though you're a first grader. Even if you're not science-oriented and aren't a complete nerd like me, you can grasp the basics of these concepts. I've worked with enough students over the years to know that it is indeed possible for the average vocalist to understand vocal terminology and gain a rudimentary understanding of the physiological and acoustical laws that govern the vocal instrument. I have faith in you. You can learn this, you can understand this. It simply might be a bit of a learning curve for you, as it was for me early on. So today, I'm just going to explain a few of the terms that I tend to use regularly in my videos, Facebook posts, and SingWise articles. If necessary, I might continue this glossary down the road if I find that I've missed some important terms or definitions. The larynx, it's correctly pronounced larynx, not larynx, is colloquially called the voice box. It's located inside the neck at about the halfway point, but it can be a little higher or lower depending on the individual's anatomy. At the front, there's a protective shield-shaped cartilage that we call the Adam's apple. It's actually called the thyroid cartilage. The larynx houses the vocal folds which are responsible for our sound production. I'll get a little bit more into detail about the vocal folds in a moment. The larynx contains extrinsic muscles that move it as a whole up and down inside the neck and tilted. It also contains intrinsic muscles that perform a number of different mechanical actions, including opening and closing the glottis, stretching the vocal folds for higher pitches, and more. And that's all I'm going to say about the structure of the larynx today because that's the most important part. The vocal folds, which are still often referred to as the vocal cords, are small bands of ligament and muscle. They stretch across the larynx and lie roughly parallel to the floor and form a V shape with the tip of the V pointing toward the front of our necks. The muscular body of the vocal folds, the Vocalis or Thyroarytenoid muscle, which is often called the chest voice muscle or vocal fold shortening muscle, is largely responsible for bringing the middle parts of the vocal ligaments closer together when we sing. The arytenoid cartilages at the back, with the help of some muscles, are mostly responsible for drawing the back portion of the vocal folds together. The Vocalis muscle is not involved in vocal fold vibration. It doesn't vibrate to make our sound. When air starts to exit our lungs and the vocal folds are brought close enough together, they start to vibrate. And this vibration chops the exiting air from the lungs into tiny puffs, which essentially create sound waves. These sound waves are the basic sound of our voices before they're tuned by the supraglottal vocal tract. Supra meaning above, and glottal referring to the glottis. The glottis is the space between the vocal folds. When we say that the glottis is open, it's because the vocal folds have been drawn apart. When we say that the glottis is closed, it's because the vocal folds have been drawn completely together, so there's no space between them. The glottis can be completely open, completely closed, or only partially open or closed. Subglottal pressure refers to the air pressure that is beneath, the glottis when it's closed. The level of subglottal pressure is determined by how much air is inside the trachea and lungs and the volume of those cavities, so how large their spaces are. If we inhale very deeply and hold our breath, either with our mouths or by closing the glottis, our subglottal pressures will be fairly high, higher than the atmospheric pressure. If, while we're still holding our breath, we also start to squeeze with our abdominal muscles, we'll effectively be making the space inside the chest cavity smaller, which will further increase the subglottal pressures. It's like taking a container and filling it with air and sealing it off. If we then make that container smaller, shrink it somehow, we still have the same amount of air molecules inside it, but now they're in a smaller space and are bumping up against each other and against the inside walls of the container even more. It's like being on a city bus during rush hour, standing room only, and you can only hope and pray that the person standing next to you is wearing deodorant. Now, vocal register is a bit tricky to define because the term can refer to a few things. As a result, you'll probably find that teachers don't use the term in the same way. It can refer to a general non-specific area of the singer's range, as in higher register and lower register, a specific area of the singer's range that is characterized by a unique vibratory pattern of the vocal folds, or even just a quality that is heard in any given part of the range. I generally use the term to refer to a part of the singer's vocal range that demonstrates a unique vibratory pattern of the vocal folds. There is some debate about how many registers we have or can access, but the most common teaching is that of two primary registers that encompass the majority of the singing range: the chest register and the head register, sometimes collectively called the modal register or modal voice, and some other lesser registers that might include the vocal fry register at the very lowest part of the range, not to be confused with the vocal fry quality that can be applied throughout the range, and the whistle register at the very top of the singer's range. Like Marchese, I believe that women have a middle register that is a full octave in range between the lower and upper passaggi. This is something that I experience in my own voice and also hear in my female students. It's a cricothyroid muscle, head voice, vocal fold lengthener muscle, dominant coordination, but it doesn't sound or feel quite like head voice. Many singers want to reject the traditional terms chest register and head register because they're subjective, vague, and unscientific, in favor of more accurate terms such as M1 and M2 or modal voice, but these efforts to establish a more precise labeling system of the vocal registers seems to be met with some resistance by the traditionalists, so for now at least, chest register and head register remain in common usage. I will often refer to the chest register as the Thyroarytenoid muscle or TA dominant mechanism, and to the middle and head registers as the Cricothyroid muscle or CT dominant mechanisms. My view is that as long as we're on the same page, we'll be just fine. There won't be much confusion to worry about. Passaggio comes from the Italian word passage. In singing, it represents a point of transition between one vocal register and another. I tend to use passaggio, passaggi plural, in the classical sense, but we do hear many non-classically trained teachers adopting Italian classical terms, probably because they're relying on the good reputation of classical technique to make their own teaching sound more legitimate and appealing. Now, these teachers also tend to apply the term passaggio to the register break. They use these two terms synonymously, but they're not using passaggio as it was originally intended to be used. In any case, the term originates from the Swedish-Italian classical school of singing. There are two passaggi for both men and women. The male passaggi are called the primo passaggio and the secondo passaggio. The female equivalents are the lower passaggio and the upper passaggio. In between these two register transition points lie a zona di passaggio, passage zone for men, and, as I mentioned a moment ago, a middle register for women. Some refer to the area between the lower and upper passaggi as the passaggio because in the well-trained voice, the adjustments made are subtle and the transition between registers is gradual, not abrupt, and occurs over several notes. A register break refers to the place in the scale where the singer's voice flips, cuts out, gets really shaky or weak, or otherwise sounds suddenly different or moves the singer into the next register in a very abrupt manner. Most men experience register breaks somewhere between E4 and F sharp 4. That's the E, F, and F sharp above middle C, give or take, depending on their voice type and vowel. Most women experience their breaks somewhere between A4 and B4, depending on their voice type and vowel. I won't get into this now, but register breaks result from static laryngeal function and poor tuning of our resonances. Essentially, as we move up the scale, we need to allow for continual adjustments of our vocal instruments. If we don't, the voice gets to a point where it says enough is enough and it breaks or flips or starts to wobble. Phonation frequency is simply the pitch that we're singing. I tend to use the term phonation frequency often because it's actually more scientifically accurate and precise than pitch. I won't get into the reasons why this is so, but I'll tend to use phonation frequency and pitch interchangeably to make it a bit easier to understand. So this is a basic introduction to the vocal terminology that I tend to use. I do get into a lot more detail in my articles, posts, and videos, but this should get you up to speed. All other terms, including references to specific muscles and cartilages, I tend to explain as I go along, but you are always welcome to ask me to define other terms. I'll be happy to do so in the comment section below, in a post on the SingWise Facebook page, or in an email addressed to Karyn@singwise.com. And if I find that I've missed a lot of important terms, I'll record a second glossary for you. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Please like this video and subscribe to this channel so that you'll know when I post the next video. Take care.